All right. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for our 10th annual New York Seafood Summit at the CIA. This is our second of 3 Seafood Summit events that take place across New York State. The first took place last week, or 2 weeks ago, at the Riverhead Free Library. This event was very focused on wild capture fisheries, local marine-based aquaculture operations, largely our oyster farmers, and bringing together those industries as well as our elected officials to talk about challenges and opportunities that those industries face and discuss and explore opportunities to enhance and support those industries. Here today, we'll focus a little bit more on the culinary side of seafood preparation, handling and consumption. And our final Seafood Summit event, our upstate event, will take place tomorrow in Oswego, New York, which is a little more focused on a recreational angling, recreational anglers, handlers, health advisories, and a variety of speakers that are focused on research related to recreational fishing, as well as some chefs who are going to showcase preparation of some local yellow perch. For those who aren't familiar with the event as a whole, we initiated the Seafood Summit in 2016, and it was started as a means of helping to engage and facilitating active conversation and collaboration across the various sectors of New York's seafood industry, building discussions and creating a platform for industry to engage with academics, researchers, and elected officials to create a platform for change and working towards mutual goals. The summit activities are largely supported through donations as well as grant programs. So if you are so inclined, we do have opportunities on our webpage and through the QR code to donate to the summit. You can learn more at our nyscgrant.org/Seafood Summit webpage. That is where all past summit recordings are available. So if you missed previous summits or you're interested in some of the topics and what's been discussed at other events outside of the mid-state region, you can view all those past recordings as well as these recordings in the next few weeks on that Seafood Summit webpage. In addition, new this year to help support our summit activities, we do have some Sea Grant apparel. That apparel is for sale. We have sweatshirts. Those sweatshirts have our logo on the front, but Eat New York Seafood on the back with a squid outline. I've got an example right here. We also are raffling off. That door prize is going to be one of our insulated Eat New York Seafood totes that you see up here. Inside it has a sweatshirt where you can exchange for whatever size you want. It also has a buff. If you're not familiar, that's kind of the gator neck gear, right? And this is a New York seafood buff. It's got an oyster on it along with our logo. Again, we'll raffle off 2 of these at the beginning or at the end of today's event. We also, throughout the room, especially up in where the food will be later, there are QR codes, right? And there are that take you to an evaluation. It says summit evaluation on the top. For anybody who puts in and enters or evaluates today's session, gives us their feedback, right? That is anonymous, but after you submit, it will take you to another page where you can enter your information and you'll be entered into another drawing for a raffle. Again, for our buff and our shirt. So if you have 2 chances or 3 chances to win today, so please do complete those evaluations. And we'll also get that out to our online participants as well. And if you have any interest in purchasing a sweatshirt, also the buff, we have some QR codes around the room. You can find Barry or myself at the end of the day. We can assist you with that. If you're not one of the lucky winners, but you still want to go home or have some gifts you need for folks, we have these available for sale and purchase today. I want to take a minute to introduce our Seafood Summit planning team. These are the folks who have been involved in planning this year's summit, many of whom, or most of whom, have been involved in previous summits as well for years. I'm Mike Saramella. I'm a Seafood Safety and Technology Specialist with New York Sea Grant. I've been in my role for about 11 years now, working to advance and support New York's seafood industry, as well as emerging blue foods industries like our seafood industry here in New York. Barry Udelson up in the back. Barry is helping with monitoring our chat. So if anybody has questions online or is experiencing any issues, feel free to message Barry in the chat. Barry is our aquaculture specialist, working directly with aquaculture industry across the state to support aquaculture operations and enhance growth and production of that industry. We have our colleagues at Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County, Kristen Gerbino, who is joining us here today, joined with Alex, not directly on the planning team, but crucial in helping us with our Riverhead and Summit events. Tara McClintock and Scott Sorotolo-Wageman are also part of that planning team, assisting largely with our Riverhead event down on Long Island. Stacy Fergal is part of the New York Sea Grant team. She's the fisheries specialist for the Great Lakes. She is helping in a support role in the Oswego event. So we'll be joining Stacy tomorrow up in Oswego to do our third and final Seafood Summit event at the Oswego Public Library. Dr. Stephen Frattini is with the Center for Aquatic Animal Research and Management. Steve is an aquatic veterinarian with vested interest in seafood sustainability, production, and he was one of the founding members of our Seafood Summit back in 2016. It was kind of a collaboration between the two of us, an idea we had to bring these various sectors of the industry together. And he has been engaged and involved in the planning of these events ever since. And lastly, Bruce Mattel, our former dean here at the CIA, and our contact with the Culinary Institute. Our contacts with Bruce are what brought us here about 4 or 5 years ago at this point. And Bruce is going to give an introduction and a welcome in just a minute, but Bruce was crucial in bringing us here to the culinary space and focusing on our culinary side of our Seafood Summit events. For those who aren't familiar with New York Sea Grant is one of 34 university-based programs. It's a partnership here in New York through NOAA, the federal government, as well as the SUNY system, largely based out of Stony Brook, as well as Cornell University and Cornell Cooperative Extension, which runs our extension program. We do a variety of activities, all focusing on our coastal resources and our coastal communities through education, research, and extension activities, providing a variety of different trainings and opportunities for the industry. If you want to know more about the other aspects of Sea Grant, the non-seafood and aquaculture side, you can visit our Sea Grant website, nysgrant.org, to find a map and all the various specialists that we have across the state working in a variety of different areas, all related to our coastal resources. As far as our seafood activities, we've got some updates here. Recently, I said we've been working a lot more in the seaweed space and providing some support for an emerging industry here in New York, but a growing industry nationwide as well as globally in production of seaweed and seaweed-based products. With that, there was a lot of interest in understanding the hazards associated with seaweeds and how you effectively produce seaweeds as food and where they fit within the current regulatory structure. So over the past about 3 years, I've been doing a lot of work with colleagues across the country as well as internationally to identify the best practices for seaweed food safety and developing food safety plans to support safe products in the market. There's a variety of new resources that we have on our seaweed resource page, which you see here on the slide. I'll also note, I will share all these slides as PDFs with active links, so you don't have to write and note all these down. We'll get you the slides. They'll be available online, and you can click to all of these resource pages. Also, a variety of these, most of these resources are also in print up in the back. So during our networking resource session at the end, they'll be available for you to grab, and I can answer any questions you have. But the newest of that is a seaweed food safety guidance, which is a large, extensive guide mimicking the Fish and Fishery Product Hazards and Controls Guide that outlines the variety of different seaweed products that are typically consumed, as well as the various hazards that are potentially associated with those, as well, and provide some guidance around how you can develop effective food safety plans to control and prevent those hazards in your products. We've also been working with state agencies, state partners on how hosting seafood and aquaculture office hours. I forgot to update this. Our last one was April 2nd. Our next one will be in July, but April 2nd, Josh, who is here today, gave an update on various grant opportunities that might be relevant to New York's seafood industry. So if you are interested in that, you can look back to those webinars, those office hours, and get an update on some grant opportunities that are currently available, although I think they end in late April. So go quick and look those up if you're interested. But July 16th will be our next office hour session, and it's going to be an overview of seafood production in our marine district from the Department of Environmental Conservation. So aquaculture, fisheries, as well as recreational angling, overview of what's happening in New York's marine district. We are also hosting the Aquatic Foods Conference this year. That is a conference focused largely and exclusively on aquatic foods or blue foods. So it's seafood, seaweed, That's going to be in Long Beach on May 20th. If you want to learn more about the research and what our projects and updates is happening in the industry, that's a great small conference to go to meet others, especially like myself. A lot of my colleagues across the country will participate and attend that. Those working in seafood safety extension and education, as well as research, will be present, sharing some of their efforts, their research, but also learning from the industry here in New York. And then we'll jump to some of our training programs. So we provide some food safety training. We have HACCP as our standing training program that we offer at least 4 times a year. We've got a few more coming up. The next will be April 28th. April 28th and the December 8th, I think, no, cross that on mine. That is going to be virtual, right? And August 11th is our in-person training. If you're more of an in-person and you want to come down to Long Island at Stony Brook, we will host the in-person training on August 11th. A new training coming out, if you're not familiar, if you joined us last year, we did talk a lot about the traceability rule, FSMA 204. This is a new rule that adds additional requirements for traceability associated with a variety of food products. Much seafood that we use and utilize is going to be subject to this new rule. And there are additional requirements for traceability and trace back to ensure that those can be pulled from market safely. There is a new training from the Preventive Controls Food Safety Alliance. Recently completed the qualifications to teach and offer that training here in New York. So we will be looking into offering that over time. If there is interest, please reach out to me. The more interest we have, the more offerings we will make. There's also some updates to the sanitation control procedures training offered through the Seafood HACCP Alliance. So that really focuses on sanitation practices. To some extent, it will cover the practices themselves, but largely helps you understand how to effectively keep the records that you're required to keep associated with sanitation as part of the Seafood HACCP rule. So again, that's another training that we can offer, as well as some other supplemental trainings that are coming down the line through the Seafood HACCP Alliance. So with that, I'll quickly go over the agenda for today, and then I'll have Bruce come up and start us off with a welcome from the Culinary Institute of America. We then will transition into our keynote speaker with Ken Baker here from Rethink Foods to talk a little bit about their programming and their work to reduce food waste. We'll have a workforce development panel looking at and exploring the needs of the workforce, right? Training opportunities within the culinary and seafood workforce. We'll have a cooking demonstration by Chef Bruce. We'll then break, we'll do our raffle, then we'll break off, we'll go out to the lobby where we'll have an oyster shucking competition with some of our students here at the Culinary Institute. And you'll have the opportunity to be tasting a variety of different seafood species, both farmed here in New York as well as wild caught by our New York fishermen. And as we go through, if you have questions, we'll have some designated Q&A breaks. But once we get up there in the Neat Resources and Networking Expo, myself, Barry, the CCE team will all be around to answer any questions you may have. But please feel free to reach out, and any of the resources up there, unless they say display only, are fair game and you're welcome to take. All right, so with that, I would like to have Bruce come on up. Is that on? I don't think that's on. There you go.
That's better, right? Welcome to the CIA. One of our guiding principles here relates to making sure that our students know where food comes from, where their food comes from, where the food that they're going to prepare for their guests come from. So we have woven education on agriculture, aquaculture, supply chain, all throughout the program. Within our undergraduate program, all the students that are majoring in culinary arts take a class called Seafood Fabrication and Identification. And that's a class where they learn how to not only fabricate fish, but how to purchase it, what are the considerations that chefs have for sourcing the product, and knowing how to identify the product so that they don't get scammed or fall victim to seafood fraud, which is pretty common, unfortunately. They also have a class called Introduction to Food Systems, where they learn about food systems. So even though we teach within that seafood class, we talk about basic fishing methods and we talk a little bit about aquaculture. They do a deeper dive in the introduction to food systems class. Within the bachelor's program, as they progress, we have a concentration and a degree in applied food studies. And that's where they take even a deeper dive into food supply chain, and all forms of agriculture and aquaculture and animal husbandry, et cetera, et cetera. And also they learn about regulatory and policies and what they're going to be dealing with moving on. And we also, if you don't know, have a master's degree in food systems and sustainability. So this is all, it's like an ongoing process for the students that are really interested in these areas to keep furthering their education and become experts in that area. So we're very passionate about seafood here. We think it's very important that we maintain the health of our oceans and maintain seafood populations for our posterity to enjoy. So I guess when it comes down to it, that's the big goal, right? Even every year we host, we have many conferences at the CIA, most of them being held in California and Napa at our Copia campus. But the one that we host here regularly in June usually is Menus of Change. And this is a conference that's done in collaboration with with Harvard School of Public Health. And the idea there is to create sustainable food systems for generations to come. And this year, the first day is focused on opportunities with blue foods. So it's really centering on seafood, local seafood, sustainable seafood, underutilized seafood, bycatch, all these things that we feel very, very passionate about at Sea Grant and Cornell Cooperative Extension in terms of making sure that these products end up with some kind of market so they don't get wasted, and it takes the pressure off some of the overfished species. So again, I welcome you. I hope this is very interesting to you. I expect more students to come, hopefully. Their classes get out really at 1:30, so we'll see what happens. And enjoy your day. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Ken. So now I want to bring up Ken Baker, who is the Culinary Director with Rethink Foods. And Ken's going to introduce Rethink Foods, the work they're doing, addressing hunger in urban and New York City region, as well as helping to reduce food waste.
This mic. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Baker. I'm the Culinary Director of Rethink Food. Thank you to Mike and the Sea Grant team for having me here and having the opportunity to share the work we're doing in New York City and in Miami and in Chicago, and hopefully planting seeds of service across our entire industry to bring sustainability to our industry. Our mission at Rethink Food is to create a more sustainable and equitable food system. We'll be speaking in this presentation about that sustainability aspect, and you're here in the workforce development portion about the equity we want to bring to this industry and to the work that we're doing. Give you a background on Rethink Food. We were founded in 2017. My boss, our founder and CEO, Matt Godriak, was a line cook working for our co-founder, Chef Daniel Hume of 11 Maximum Park, when he thought about this idea of Rethink Food, and really where it came from. If you live in New York City, you know viscerally the face of food insecurity. You see it everywhere. And within the footprint of our industry, particularly at the highest echelons of dining, fine dining, a lot of food goes to waste. And he was really just trying to marry two problems and find a solution. How do we eliminate the waste that's within the footprint of our industry, while also nourishing so many of our neighbors in need? And that's where the idea of Rethink Food came about. We started out very small. We had a little basement kitchen in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And we had one truck in which we just went around collecting excess food, and we came back to the kitchen and we would just make meals. What a Rethink meal is a chef-curated, hot, nutrient-dense, ready-to-eat meal, just recognizing some of the limitations of what food insecurity looks like in New York City. Many of our neighbors who are facing food insecurity are not domiciled in places where they have access to adequate kitchen infrastructure. If you are a family of 4 or 5, which is a typically large family in New York City, it's very difficult to find affordable housing within that meets the needs of that dynamic. And so you'll see a lot of families that are domiciled in places where they may not have a kitchen. They may just have a kitchenette or a hot plate. And the typical sources within the food access space are food pantries or soup kitchens in which you get a bag of groceries. But what good is that bag of groceries if you can't go home and make a meal? Also, limitation of time. Most people who are operating or existing in the marginalization of food insecurity, or simply put it, poverty, don't have the autonomy of time. They may have to work in places that their commute is an hour and a half, 2 hours long, one way, and so round trip, and then they have to pick up their kids from disparate locations of childcare, because the second biggest expenditure in New York City, absent of housing, is childcare. By the time you get home at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, you don't have time to make a meal. Also, more importantly, that face and that stigma of what food insecurity looks like, many people have this notion that it's individuals experiencing homelessness or suffering from substance or drug abuse issues. Yes, that's a small population within the communities that we serve, but the vast majority of our neighbors and constituents that we are serving are working people who are working hard, working 40, 50, 60 hours a week and just can't make ends meet. And so that's where we came up with the idea of Rethink Food. And our model is very simple. In my role as Culinary Director, I lead all of our internal operations. We have our sustainable community kitchen in the heart of the village, located at 116 West Houston Street. And we also have a very encompassing logistics team in which we have a fleet of 6 vehicles, refrigerated vehicles, that are going around and collecting food excess from every appendage of the food ecosystem. We're talking about retail partners like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, independent restaurants like our co-founders restaurant 11 Madison Park and other restaurants throughout our network, big manufacturers, college campuses. The CUNY and SUNY campuses are big pockets of just large donations that we bring in, especially when you're looking at this time where we find ourselves in the spring recess periods for Easter holiday, Passover, where school's not in session. Many of these college campuses waste a lot of food. And just to give a little background to my work before I came to Rethink Food, I worked for Aramark in higher education dining at Johns Hopkins University in my hometown of Baltimore and American University. And I do know that there's so much food that goes to waste. And so what we're really trying to do is solve 2 things, coupling how we are reducing food waste while also combating food insecurity. So what that looks like is trying to capture that 30 to 40% of food that's produced, grown, manufactured within our ecosystem. And I do know that in the seafood world, that number is a little bit higher. 50 to 65% of seafood that's harvested isn't fully utilized within our system. But we have such a growing need of individuals who are facing food insecurity. How do we combat that? And our model is really predicated on utilizing our sustainable community kitchen as an example, but also not being hyper focused on the bureaucracy or capturing metrics, but really getting to the source of combating that need in its scope. And so our secondary program in which we operate is really the bandwidth of how most meals get out to our communities, and that's empowering our existing infrastructure, empowering restaurants. We have a network of over 65 restaurants operating just in New York City alone, in which, as a nonprofit, we're giving them grants and we're empowering them to make meals on our behalf, and we target those meals to communities within the footprint of that restaurant to create this symbiotic ecosystem that's really just fostering community. Because what we do know is that consumers, our consumer base in which restaurants already operate on tight margins, that diner who goes to a restaurant on Friday night because it has that amazing meal that they love, when they find out that restaurant's also making 100, 150, 200 meals for food insecure neighbors within the footprint of that restaurant, they're going to keep going back there and support that restaurant. But we also are doing is giving sustainability, and how we look at sustainability in the Rethink lens is holistically. We're giving sustainability to our industry. Many of our restaurant partners are making Rethink meals in those hours of their operation in which they're not getting that 100% ROI on a massive investment of overhead that it costs to operate a restaurant in New York City. Think about your favorite restaurant. This time of day, between lunch and dinner service, You're lucky if they do a dozen covers. What we do is that we provide them a grant and we ask them, how many meals can you make within that period? You already have the existing infrastructure. You already have the payroll that's not being fully utilized. Let's put that to work in action. And also, let's get diversified meals out in this space. A lot of the food that goes out in the food access and relief space isn't the best quality food. And we hang our hats on the fact that we are a chef-led nonprofit. At the heart of it, we want our food to be received well. We want it to look good, taste good, and be presented with that underpinning of our industry, which is service, which we talk about that in just this sheer intention. If we're serving individuals in the Bowery, we want to make sure that we're making meals that are relevant to their lived experience. The same way that New York City translates languages in over 120 different languages. Well, people eat food that's salient to their lived experience. And so how we feed Washington Heights is uniquely different than how we feed the Bowery. Within the footprint of our sustainable community kitchen, which is where you see me standing right there, we make about 30,000 meals a week. And we're doing that predicated on this notion of reducing food waste. So every single day, at the start of our day, we run 2 routes in our trucking and logistics team. The first route is full of meals that we made the day prior that are going out to be delivered to community partners, in which is a mouthpiece of our service. We don't directly service any constituent because we're barely 8 years old. Who are we to walk in any single community and say, hey, we're Rethink Food, we're here to feed you? Instead, our model is predicated partnering with a trusted community-based organization, that anchoring of that community that can inform us. Who is it that we're serving? What are the dietary preferences? What are the dietary aversions? What are the unique needs and logistical facets we need to understand about this neighborhood to be able to serve them the best intention? Because what we do know is that New York City spends $8 billion in food procurement, but for every single meal that they're buying, one meal is being thrown away. And what we want to do is eliminate that and maximize the output of impact in which getting more meals out to our community. That secondary programming, and so that first route is going out delivering those meals. That second route is going around and collecting food excess from every appendage of the food ecosystem. Our trusted retail partners like Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, which we're uniquely benefited for in New York City, is that these retail operations exist in such a smaller footprint than their counterparts in our neighboring regions like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, in which it's just churn and burn on inventory. That same salmon that's stocked at Trader Joe's on a Monday that you're selling for maybe $15.99 a pound, well, that consumer is not going to want to buy that on Wednesday at that same rate. And so they're constantly turning that inventory over, but it's not even approaching perishability. And so what we're doing is eliminating, which is a very burdensome overhead cost, that logistics, having our own trucking logistics. We're capturing that excess, bringing it back to sustainable community kitchen, and we're making nutrient dense, restaurant quality Rethink meals. And a Rethink meal is defined by a protein element, a carbohydrate, and a vegetable. In our restaurant network, what we also are trying to do and reduce food waste is utilizing our unique levers as a nonprofit and having this expansive truck and logistics team to create this almost group purchasing program for our restaurant partners who are making these meals. Our idea is that we want to empower our restaurants to be the mouthpiece of this service, but we don't want to create additional hardship. We understand that our restaurant partners, this industry operates on very tight margins, and the notion of wanting to help their neighbors is embedded in hospitality, it's embedded in service. But how do we eliminate some of those barriers of access? Eliminating some of them is just limiting the cost of that. We want to offer some of our donations that we're collecting to our restaurant partners that are making these meals to help them offset those costs. They're already eating the cost of the overhead and the labor. Let's help offset that cost so we can continue to have this stream of meals going out in the space. And then inversely, what we get is that we get to put about this diversified menu offering. We're not just making one thing and blanketing across the city, but we're making a myriad of just menu offerings every single day, not just in our single community kitchen, but through our restaurant network. And then we're just right sizing those menus to the community's appetites, taste preferences, and the need that's serving. And what this also allows us to do is be readily available to activate in those times of crisis or in those times of elevated need, in which we are very much experiencing right now. Just looking at the rising geopolitical pressures that are on our industry, particularly how it's affecting the economy and how we source, purchase food. A lot of industries just can't incubate those costs. And then you have to factor in those unique regional costs that we have to incubate as well, that you keep coming into place. One of those is congestion pricing, which we feel at a very visceral level in New York City, in which any single time a truck is coming in and out of Manhattan, that's $16 one way. For us at Rethink Food, that's about $40,000 that we have to incubate within our budget annually. And for our restaurant partners and with all their purveyors, those costs are just being pushed down. So what we're trying to do is alleviate those costs so we can get more meals out into the space. But we also are very cognizant about how we talk about and look at sustainability as a whole, holistically. It's not just how we're combating the climate crisis and reducing food waste, but how are we sustaining the fullness of our communities, which means sustaining our industries, sustaining the fabric of our communities, ensuring that individuals who may have been displaced out of the city or have large commute times to come into the city and maybe can't afford that, roughly about $10 to $15 is the cost of lunch in New York City. Many people can't incubate that with the rising costs. We want to make sure that we have these outputs of places in which people can go to get a Rethink meal, which celebrates our unique focus on impact, service, and intention. At any of our distributions, we don't have any qualifiers. What is that? What is a qualifier? Basically, you're asking someone to demonstrate their need. Show me you're poor. That's not of service, that's not of intention. And so we want to make sure that we are eliminating all the barriers of access. And in doing that, we're cultivating this community that is being empowered to feed and nourish our neighbors with dignity and care. And we typically look at it this way, that if someone's facing food insecurity, they are the dire straits of needing, not knowing where that next meal is going to come from. They are the dire straits of needing that sustenance. Similarly, put it, if you were in immediate medical care, you're not going to go to your mechanic for that medical care. Why are people facing food insecurity going to the bureaucracy of federal government or social services? Instead, go to the infrastructure and the people that have the know-how. That's why we tout ourselves as a chef-led nonprofit, and that we are creating the mouthpiece for the hospitality industry to be engaged in the philanthropic work of feeding and nourishing our neighbors, because these are the individuals that should be doing this. We fundamentally believe that restaurants are 21st century community centers and that chefs are community leaders. And if you think about it, as we've gotten more secular as a society, they're really the one place where natural human organic connectivity happens is in restaurants. When you're out dining at your favorite restaurant, you don't know the otherness of that person or that party or that table beside you. You just all know you're there for hospitality, service, and a good meal. And that's the premise of what we're doing at Rethink Food. In the model of our Sustainable Community Kitchen, though, we also are hyper-focused on how we can create systems, models, and use ourselves as an example. That's why we operate this 80,000 square foot facility, our Sustainable Community Kitchen, to be an incubator of sustainability. And within the footprint of this operation, we are creating models and systems that can be replicated in any single food service establishment or restaurant. Though we are capturing donations, we also recognize the fact that we are running a very massive logistics operation, in which is emitting carbon emissions, and we want to make sure that we are at our very best trying to be cognizant of eliminating that net neutrality of those emissions going out there. So within the footprint of our operation, we have systems put in place like the Winnow system. Has anyone ever heard of the Winnow system? It's a food waste reduction system in which is powered by internet, AI, and a lens in which is hyper-focused and is affixed in both our prep kitchen and in our hotline kitchen where we're making our meals. And it's showing the footprint of waste within our operation. And even those meals that are 65% predicated on donated excess, we're still hyper-focused on utilizing every single donation that comes into our operation. And those scalable donations that may not meet the need of, the tens of thousands of meals that we're making, we are then transferring those off to our community partners, our restaurant partners, to help offset their needs, but also to complement the meals that go out within the footprint of our space. Just giving another example to our retail partners, Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, how we capture that excess is they basically, everything that's being removed off the shelves, we just collect it off. And that's including things like toiletries and diapers and things that we don't have a use for, but we're utilizing our logistics and we're passing those off to community partners. So many of our community partners are meeting those other ancillary needs of marginalization outside of the footprint of food security. I'm going to give you guys a case study of what this looks like and how we're cultivating this community of service that is helping us nourish our neighbors and particularly focus on seafood. I'm sure many people in the room know Yama Seafood. They're one of the biggest seafood purveyors in the tri-state area. Not too far away from us, right over under the tunnel in New Jersey. They are providing the most premier premium seafood to all the Michelin-starred restaurants in New York City. And with that becomes a great footprint of waste, because operating at the highest echelons of food service, of fine dining, requires the most pristine food ingredients. And even like tuna, if it's just off by a shade or two, those restaurants are not going to want to buy that because of the rising costs, and they have a commitment to their consumers. There's nothing wrong with that food. It's just aesthetically, it may not be up to par with what they're doing. And so we partnered with them, and again, utilizing our unique leverage points as a nonprofit, we can lend our 501c3 tax write-off status to any donations coming in. And every single week, every Friday, we're going to Yama Seafood and picking up hundreds of pounds of premium seafood that we're bringing back to our kitchen and creating amazing meals for our community members in need. And what that also does for us, it allows us to cement us in a unique position and place in this food access space, and not just providing a meal for sustenance, but our mission within our mission is to elevate the quality of food that goes out in the space, that we are giving that level of service to our neighbors in need, and ensuring that within this food ecosystem that we are leaning on every single lever that we can pull on to minimize the cost of the meal going out in the space, but also bringing more people under this tent. And so people understand that this mission of us wanting to combat food insecurity and end food insecurity can't be done alone, and is truly done in a communal fashion. I'm going to stop right there for a little bit and open up the floor for a little bit of questions, if anyone has any.
Any questions for Ken?
Yes.
So, couple of things. Have you approached the Bronx Terminal Market for also like you sort of like a same type of arrangement you have with seafood place in Jersey?
Absolutely, yes, we have. And actually, in our efforts to cultivate a larger community of doing this work, what we will do is try to partner with other existing entities that are doing similar work to us and lend the uniqueness of the fullness of our operation to help support that. We just recently absorbed Rap for Bronx, which is a subordinate nonprofit that was doing similar work to us. We just absorbed them in January of this year. And Rap for Bronx is an acronym, Relief Access Program for the Bronx, in which they have a very large presence at Terminal Market. And now with them under our umbrella and being able to add more logistical might to their work, we're capturing excess from them in a very amazing way. And then we're also with them, they are one of the recipients from they get the HIFNAT grant from the state, in which now we're able to impart local produce from New York State farmers into our programming as well.
Awesome. What you do though does sound like a logistical kind of nightmare. So, I mean, how do you manage all that? I mean, do you have people on staff that just manage logistics?
Yes. So my right hand, my chief deputy is our director of logistics, Oscar Gomez, and that's his sole focus is managing the trucking and logistics of the operation and ensuring ways in which we can minimize costs while not sacrificing on the impact and meals going out into space.
That's great what you're doing. It's really exciting. How many restaurant partners do you have
right now? About 65 at current standing right now.
Okay. And about
here in New York City, and then we also operate networks in Chicago and Miami as well. And so down in Miami, it's about 22 restaurant partners. In Chicago, we just returned back to Chicago. We had a little hiatus because we had a funding lapse, but US Food has been very gracious and has funded our operation to return there last year, and I just re-upped their funding for us to continue working there this year.
Yeah, that's great. And about how many meals would you say you distribute over the course of
So on a weekly basis, we distribute about 60,000 meals, and within that 60,000 meals, the meals that we're making in-house is roughly about 11,000. The vast majority of meals in which we celebrate are made by our restaurant partners. We really are creating the sustainable resources and programming to allow restaurants to be very present in the space.
Yeah, that's amazing. And where does most of your funding come from?
Most of our funding comes from philanthropic donors, but what we're realizing in our effort to sustain Rethink Food, to be able to create a more sustainable food system, is that, you know, the attention and whims of donors shifts and changes, and particularly, I'll be just very candid and honest and vulnerable. As one of our core values is that, you know, with the current administration has kind of shifted, at least with institutional foundation funders, how people want to fund things. And so what we went out to do is create kind of like an underpinning that can secure a streamline of funding sources for us. And so we're doing a little bit of government contracting work. And so if you guys remember the migrant crisis that we experienced here in New York City a couple of years ago, when you heard about, you know, Roosevelt Hotel, Floyd Bennett Field, those were our meals that were feeding those communities.
Hi, you said that you guys use local places that to distribute the food. What are some of those types?
So there's a community-based organization. So within the footprint of New York City, there's names like NBA North Brooklyn Angels, Covenant House, which is a nonprofit that's dedicated to housing youth experiencing homelessness. A lot of the posture of our services embedded within faith-based institutions, churches, synagogues, mosques, academic spaces, schools, healthcare facilities. But basically any community-based organization that has that trust and anchoring of that community who can inform us, hey, what is the need? What is the demographic? How can we best serve you? That's who we're looking for. But we also want to make sure that it doesn't feel like charity. We don't want it to feel like a social services office or have to navigate a bureaucratic matrix to get a meal. We want it to be somewhere where people will go. As I said, the majority of the constituents that we are feeding, these are working people. And it's very hard for an adult to raise their hand and ask for help, especially when you are working your ass off 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And so we want to meet people where they are. And so we can provide that meal service in a place where you may worship on Sundays or Fridays or Saturdays. It doesn't feel like that charitable thing.
I'm really intrigued by the logistics piece. Have you like contacted Amazon to like get their assistance or ideas or leverage their services?
I have not, and I really wouldn't know how a way in which it would be. I mean, we work with them. I guess we work with them through their ownership of Whole Foods and on the donation side, but logistically, I don't know a way in which they would be able to facilitate us, because the way in which Amazon delivers in New York City is uniquely different than anywhere else in the country, and oftentimes most of us who have experience with Amazon aren't the best logistically. Most of the packages that are delivered within the footprint of the city are by motorized scooters, or those like, I don't even know what they're called. They're like a bike and there's like this big wagon on the back of it. But we work, I mean, through our partnership with Whole Foods, I guess tangentially we're working with Amazon.
Hi, so thank you again so much for the amazing work that you're doing. I was wondering, it seems like the focus is mainly in urban environments. Is there any chatter or talk about expanding maybe outside the city environment, or is like logistics of like food procurement and food waste, you know, too difficult outside of, I guess?
I'm glad you raised that, and that's something that we are hyper focused on. And so we've had pilot programs, and we have some existing pilot programs that are running in non-urban environments. One of them is in Bentonville, Arkansas. Other is in Lower Brule and in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, in which we're trying to showcase what we fundamentally believe is that food insecurity exists in every single community, and every single community has some level of a restaurant, food service operation. And then we just can create sustainable resources to do that. We can get meal at the door. But the biggest challenge of that is in the more rural environments, that logistical piece is the biggest hurdle to overcome. When we did our pilot in Bentonville, we had individuals driving from Oklahoma just to come and get this hot meal. And, you know, that just demonstrates the need, but it's also, you know, that individual who can drive there, they're spending a lot of money in gas. And so how do we overcome that? And we're constantly, keep that forefront and trying to find those ways. But that's why we focus on that community-based organization model, because we do know that these type of institutions like churches, schools, faith-based institutions are the most readily available places where people can go and get meals, but there's still a little barrier of access of transportation and how to get there. And it's something that we tackle with that tension every single day.
I guess the follow-up question I'll have with that too is have you done any, I guess, exploration in the Long Island area since with not
Sorry, what was that last
any
part?
exploration in the Long Island area, especially with its somewhat close proximity to Manhattan, somewhat.
Long Island, and we have starts and stops in Long Island, and I see my friend Chef Rowe over there. We have starts and stops with Long Island. Again, it's one of those, it seems very close to us, but traffic. Traffic is an element that we just can't control in this model. And so to that extent in which we try to create a framing or programming, we want to empower restaurants to kind of, pick up the Rethink mantle and kind of have little sub hubs of Rethink in those areas. Logistically for us, it's just, we tried to have a very strong presence in Long Island. It turned our routes completely upside down. I mean, you could spend 4 hours of any dedicated route just delivering to maybe just 2 locations.
We have 2 more questions, Antonia and then Henry. And while Ken, you're answering those, I'm going to set up our chairs for our panelists. So go ahead, Antonia.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. You talked about the refrigerated trucks, right?
Yeah.
That go around and pick up the food excess donations. Can you talk a little bit about what your cold storage looks like and how important cold storage infrastructure is?
Very important. I'm glad you asked that. That's actually why we moved to our location where we are at now. We've been in our sustainable community kitchen at 116 West Houston Street for a little bit over 2 years. We moved in January of 2024. But prior to that, we were at a pretty large facility in Fidei at 180 Maiden Lane. But the only problem there was there wasn't enough sufficient cold storage. And even in what we're doing and capturing donations, any given day I'll get a call from major manufacturer producers like Purdue or, Beyond Meat. And they'll say, hey, we have a pallet of A, B, C, X, Y, and Z that's ready for you, and you guys can come and pick it up. And that's great. We can utilize that, especially like heavy, large donation of protein, but where do I store it? And so to that extent, again, we're fostering exercise in that community muscle. We partner with other organizations. One of our great complementary organizations and partners in the food access weave space, City Harvest, has this massive facility in Sunset Park in which they have a lot of cold storage that's being underutilized. And so we rent external cold storage from them. And so when I have those large, couple pallet size donations, we send our trucks out to pick them up, and then we directly take that to City Harvest. And then for our inventory, we're just drawing down from that on a weekly basis.
All right. So I heard a lot about the New York City locations where you get donations from. Do you have any recommendations for the city of Buffalo? Because there's a lot of food insecurity in that city.
There is a lot of food insecurity in that city, and I'm remiss that I didn't raise this. And so in our efforts to ensure that this work is sustained, but also that we can empower other people to kind of pick this up and do this, we are also very present in the policy space. And so we are currently advocating for a chef and community tax credit, in which is the legislative vehicle of what we're doing, giving grants to restaurants that will operate at the state level. It's been currently introduced here in New York State and Assembly by our great champion, Assemblymember Charles Falls, in which we're very hopeful that the governor has indicated it will be included in her budget. And what that will do is unleash $10,000 for restaurants to be able to draw down from and be able to do the work that we're doing absent of a rethink. And that's really what's important to us. We don't need to be front and center in the solution, as long as we're ensuring that more meals are going out into that space. And so with that, we're anticipating that if this does pass, many restaurants will be able to tackle that. And we're looking at our other, city regions across the state to be able to help them facilitate that. And Buffalo is high on the list because, yes, we do know Buffalo is very similar to my hometown of Baltimore, Maryland, which faces a lot of food insecurity as well. And when that passes, these restaurants will be able to just draw down from that and be able to make these meals and also provide that sustainability of financial sustainability of of a stationary revenue stream that's coming in that can support this type of work in this space.
All right, thank you, Ken. For the sake of time, I want to transition us over into the panel, but we do have lots of time in the panel for some questions from Ken as well as our other panelists. So Ken will be joining us as well and sticking up with us for the panel, but I'll invite our other panelists to come on down. Today's panel is going to focus on workforce development challenges and needs within the seafood and culinary space. Ken Baker from Rethink Food is going to stay up here with us and continue on discussing our workforce development needs. We've got Antonia Giuliano. Did I get that right? Got it. All right. With the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets as a senior policy advisor. We have Chef Chris Muller with the Culinary Institute of America, consulting chef, joining us. And lastly, Ron Crawford with Unleash Potential. He's the Director of Consulting Services and Coaching. Unfortunately, Ian could not make it today, so we've got our 4 panelists up here. Again, I have a variety of questions that I'll go through and ask each of you. And if you have anybody has anything to add, please feel free to do so. We just ask you try to avoid repetition within the panel so we can make sure that we try to end up on time. At the end, we'll open it up and we'll take any questions from the audience that you may have for any of our panelists. Before we get started, I want to start with just each of our panelists giving a quick introduction to themselves, their programs, kind of what they do, as well as kind of their connection to the seafood or culinary workspace. Ken, I know you already introduced yourself, so if you have anything else you want to add. All right, so Antonia.
Well, I enjoyed learning from you, Ken, so you're a hard act to follow. I'm Antonia Giuliano. I'm with the New York State Culture and Markets. I'm a senior policy advisor there, primarily focused on food safety and dairy policy, but an emerging priority for the department is workforce development for agriculture and food systems in New York, which includes seafood and aquaculture. And one of the two actually initiatives that I'd like to just quickly share is first and foremost, we currently have an RFP out on the street, $3 million that was funded in the New York State budget the past couple of years to support workforce development programs targeted to training and education for new entrants into the agriculture and food systems spaces. So that RFP is out now. If you're interested, I highly encourage you to take a look. It's posted on the State Department of Agriculture and Markets website. Come find me afterwards if you're having a hard time finding it. Applications are due on April 28th, which seems to be a very popular day for deadlines here because I saw Mike say that same day earlier on today. So April 28th, if you're interested, I'm happy to direct you where to find that. And the second initiative the department launched about 1.5 years ago is a blue ribbon panel to advance agriculture education. And this also came from Governor Hochul. The directive from the governor was to the Department of Ag and Markets to convene a blue ribbon panel of experts from K-12 education, higher education, our agriculture, and food systems industries in the state to provide the governor and the state legislature with recommendations on 2 things. First, how to advance youth agriculture education opportunities. So primarily in that K-12 space, because exposure to those topics is so important, and we don't want to wait until an individual's in 11th or 12th grade to begin to ask, where does my food come from? And second, workforce development pathways. So that panel has been hard at work for about 1.5 years. By the end of this calendar year, there will be a public report containing recommendations to the governor and the state legislature on programs, funding, initiatives, policies that would help them advance ag youth education in the state and workforce development pathways. So I'll chat a little bit more about that during our panel session today, and thank you all for having me.
Thanks, Antonia. Chef Muller.
Chris Muller, recently retired, so a little bit different than everybody in this room. I spent the bulk of my career at Le Bernardin, which was a nice seafood restaurant. Some people would say it's kind of like your seafood 11 Madison. Worked with a lot of seafood, worked with a lot of Culinary Institute graduates. We kind of really wanted to support the school in the 27 years I was there. So just try to mentor young men and women from the school, from, from other schools as well, not only the Culinary Institute, but in cooking, finding their love and their passion for cooking, and working with different types of seafoods, working with different flavor profiles, working with just trying to please our guests. Thank you.
Great. Ron?
Hi, everybody, my name is Ron Crawford. I'm the co-owner of a small leadership development and coaching company called Unleash Potential. Actually, I'm semi-retired. My first career was 33 years at Lockheed Martin, where for about 15 years of that, I ran the engineering leadership development program. So I had a large part of my career that was developing early career and mid-career engineers coming into the leadership realm. Had an opportunity to leave in 2020 and start this business. By the way, 2020, a great time, as I know a lot of restaurateurs will know, a great time to start a business that requires a lot of face-to-face. But one of my passions, and really the thing that got me connected to this, is through that period, I also did a lot of teaching and research on the different generations in the workplace. It was something that was very relevant to the aerospace and defense industry, especially from an engineering standpoint. As I came out into this broader business and started to focus in other industries, I have clients in the dairy industry, in the manufacturing industry, in the construction industry. Lots of influences where you can definitely see the generational kind of pull that you might be experiencing in all of your businesses. So it's great to be here. My connection to seafood is I love to eat it.
Great. All right. Thank you, Ron. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. So I'll kick us off with our first question. And from your perspective, what are the most urgent workforce challenges that currently face the seafood and culinary sectors, and how are they affecting employers and new entrants? Ken, you want to start us off?
Yeah, happy to. You guys heard me speak earlier about our sustainability work, but really when it comes to workforce development, this is where you see that equity portion of our mission come to bear. The majority of culinary team members that work in our sustainable communication are workforce development individuals that did not matriculate through prestigious institutions like CIA or have very little or no experience in the industry. And it's really the power that drives our impact at Rethink Food. The challenges that really are facing the workforce development space, particularly for culinary entries, are the first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that our industry doesn't do enough our onus on just regular onboarding, hiring, and training to begin with. And then when you're looking at workforce development and the individuals who would be primed for those type of programmings, there's a sensitive need and touch that really you have to recognize and come to the workforce development with that level of intention. And I think that one of the biggest things in which we don't give enough credence to is when we are training individuals within workforce development programs, we're training them for that culinary aptitude or being able to do that technical facilitation of producing the meal, but we don't do it in a space that gives the respect to the real life context or reality of the situation they exist in. Many of them never worked in a high-paced kitchen or been on a line on a Friday night and don't understand those physical pressures. And so when they feel like they've matriculated and have the training to make that meal, but then you throw them in an environment that's so just stark and different from what they're used to, that's where you see that failure come into play and where people feel like, well, am I supposed to be here? Oh, this is too much, it's too heavy. And so what we do at Rethink Food is that we first start off with just giving them existing in the environment they're going to work in. We don't subset our workforce development training to a subset group. They're part of the entirety of the operational team, and we give them the reality of the environment in which they'll be working in and help them to figure out whatever, mea culpa or uniqueness in which they have to develop their own individual workflow to exist within that environment. And then we start training the culinary and technical aptitude of the actual work. But it's really just giving respect to the sensitivity in which people are coming from, and that may be lack of training or exposure to the industry. That may be a linguistical barrier. It may be that they may be an aged worker returning back to the workforce because of economic pressures. We're seeing a lot of that in the industry right now. And so we just have to give respect to just unique individual circumstances in which individuals are coming from.
Thanks, Ed. All right, Antonia, you have anything?
Sure. So one of the things that we have learned about in our Blue Ribbon panel efforts and in my own conversations with Mike and his team is that in terms of seafood and aquaculture related careers, there are few formal training pathways and workforce development pathways in New York State, right? If it's something you're interested in, you may need help finding your path. And even outside of seafood and aquaculture, we hear that across ag and food related careers. One of the things we're really proud at the department is our engagement with youth. We do a lot of work with FFA youth. We do a lot of work with 4-H and Manor students. And regardless of where we are in the state, every time we have a conversation with them, their main request to us is provide more opportunities for my peers to have career exposure. That's what we need first and foremost. We need more career exposure, careers that aren't in our face. You know, one of the things that we are working with our dairy industry is we have huge dairy processors in our state. Fairlife is putting up a huge plant outside Rochester. Chobani is opening up their second plant in the Utica, Rome area. And when you look out the outside of those facilities, you can't see what's inside. You don't really know what careers are inside. And we're finding that that's not unique to dairy. It's a common phenomenon. And if you don't have a point of contact, you don't know somebody who works in the industry, it's kind of hard to understand what sort of careers are in there. For me, is this a place where I could fit in? And when Ken mentioned that, you know, whether you're youth or you're re-entering the workforce, and a sense of belonging is so important. And I can't overstate how important that is, particularly for this new generation. They want to feel like they belong. So I think it's sort of switching up some of our tried and true recruitment and retention tactics that employers may have used for decades, but we're dealing with a different generation coming on board that has lived some of their childhood and young adult through COVID, and now they're getting into the workplace and they're demanding and need different types of supports that I think employers are, I want to say, struggling with or trying to learn how to adapt and meet those needs.
And Ron, you have something to add? Yeah.
So, yes to everything. And just one very relevant statistic. So if we look at our Gen Z, our youngest in the workforce today, it's a very couple of local or recent studies that showed that across industries, across employers, employers were finding that 60% of their Gen Zs that they made job offers were not showing up, were just ghosting. And you know, you think about that. They went through the process of applying, of interviewing, of getting a job, getting a start date, and then they didn't show up. And you dig into that a little bit, and there's several things that contribute to that. Anxiety being one of them. This sense of, again, not knowing what's behind those walls, not knowing what's going to happen there. But if you flip it around, you look at, well, what was going on with the 40% that did show up? Yeah, there is an element of just people that just, you know, moved through that anxiety and moved in. But largely, much like Ken said, there was an element of very early engagement. If your onboarding starts the minute they hit the door on their first day, it's way too late. It's got to be 2 weeks before. You have to start making them comfortable before their start date and start giving them a sense of what they're going to. Don't make them walk through the door. You know, in Ken's example, don't make them walk through on a Friday night and sit there, because they're going to see that and they're going to say, chaos, I'm out.
I think to add to that, I would say at the educational level, we teach patience, right? We live in this food network era, right? So when I was growing up, there was maybe one channel on TV that had the food. I know Bruce probably had zero, maybe. What do we call that? The Galloping Chef, maybe, right? Or Julia Child, right? Galloping Gourmet, right? But now you turn on, so this influx in the late or early 2000s, late 90s, really brought our careers up as chefs, right? And so, but it was great because now we were finally, you know, up there with, you know, different programming like the lawyer shows and the cop shows and the fireman shows, right? And now we've got the chef shows on TV. But it brought in this whole group of people that really wanted to be the chef. Like, okay, I go to school, and when I graduate, I'm going to be the chef, right? Like you go to medical school, and now you're going to be a doctor, right? But that's not the case in our industry. As chefs, we have to be patient. We have to learn how to cook first, right? That's the number one, right, Jen?
Yeah.
It's like we don't know how to cook. We don't know how to cook. So the students, they come to the school, and we as instructors were saying, be patient. Just like in a recipe, right? You have to develop the food, the flavor of the food. You have to develop your career, right? How do you develop the career? We give them tools, right? And that's that's what I have to offer to that question.
I just want to add one more thing to that conversation, is just the reality of, are these individuals getting the actual hands-on training as it relates to seafood with the actual product that we're making? I think this is rising pressures on the seafood industry, the environmental factors of just limited population of certain seafood, which is driving the cost. Is that, chef or that workforce development program going to invest in the inventory needed so that individual to get the actual skill set of working with that product? 9 times out of 10 is going to be no. It's more theoretical and actual hands-on as it relates to seafood.
Yeah. All right. Anything else anybody wants to add to that question? And we'll transition to our next. So our next question, we want to focus on the skills and competencies that you think are most lacking in early career workers, and how can training programs be better aligned to meet real-world industry needs? And how about, and you have a mic or?
So I think it goes back to realizing that there is a more base level of training and awareness that we need to provide to early career individuals. Another statistic, I've got a lot of them, but baby boomers. So we all know that, and some of us are members of that. Baby boomers, when they entered the workforce, when they came into the workforce in kind of a full-time capacity, where they were working full-time coming out of college or coming out of the trades or straight out of high school, whatever, 65% had some sort of work experience. Today, for our youngest generation coming into the workplace, it's less than 13%. Now, there's a lot of things that contribute to that, parenting, different perspectives, but the bottom line is they come to work not knowing how to work. And so we deal with a lot of organizations that are like, well, how do they not know it's a 40-hour week? And how do they not know there's a start time and an end time, and that you don't just walk away from your job if it isn't done at the end of the day? There's still cleanup to be done. How do they not know that? Because they don't, because they haven't been taught it, and they haven't. So you have to really go to more of those fundamental types of things. And you not just have to teach the skills, but you have to teach the ethic. That's another thing. The baby boomers are the inventors of the 60, 70-hour work week, right? That's kind of the expectation of work ethic. And younger generations are more life-centered. They're more life-balanced, and they don't want to commit to those. It's not that they won't. It's not that they can't. And you will find those unicorns that are outside of that. But by and large, we've seen this flip. Whereas before, it was more likely to find somebody that was less likely to want to work overtime. Now it's less likely to find somebody that wants to work overtime. And so you just have to adapt your styles, and you have to make sure, especially if you're leading an organization, that you're not adopting perspectives and philosophies that were relevant to older generations and trying to apply them in a younger generational sense, because it's just not going to work.
Yeah, Ron, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that emphasis is on the soft skills and the culture defining of what we're trying to do here. Yes, a lot of workforce development programs focus on that aptitude, that technical skill set of doing the job, but then we also have to reinforce, well, every job has different cultures. And there's certain those intangible soft skills or indispensable notions of just how to engage with the work isn't reinforced or taught, or isn't even present in the space. Every job isn't the same, and you can, be a line cook at Applebee's or be a line cook at 11 Madison Park. There's two separate cultures to that, and we need to be very upfront and honest with that. And it's also, it might sound a little hypocrisy of what I was saying before, but not to be too sensitive in the training, because we are developing, again, it's workforce development. We're developing someone to be in the workforce. At the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that work is work. It's not convenient or comfortable. That's why we get paid to do it. But there needs to be an acknowledgement of what that looks like in whatever space or place that individual is walking into, and helping them develop those intangible soft skills where they can pivot and flow in these different environments and not just be stuck to the rigid programmatic training that they had within their workforce development training.
Chris?
I would add to that, expectation is very important. When you hire someone, if you lay out the expectations, like you were saying, the work week, I would say the quality of the product that needs to be produced. And you give them a roadmap, you give them the tools that they need to succeed. And then if they don't succeed, you take a look at yourself and you say, okay, individual A was taught like with the skill set of number 1, but he's not responding. So maybe individual A needs to be taught with the skill set of number 4, right? Take a different approach. Have as a chef, if I can have 4 different individuals from 4 different backgrounds, and I can have different techniques used to make a connection with those 4 different individuals to get the same salad or to get the same piece of salmon cooked properly, then that's a plus for me, right? Because they're going to be happy, and a happy worker is, happy life, happy chef, right? Happy food, right? And that's what we're kind of looking for.
Anything to add, Antonia, or any last comments?
I would just say any employer that we've talked to says, bring me somebody who shows up on time and reliable, and I'll teach them the technical skill set, right? So it goes back to what we heard from our other panelists, that soft, intangible skill set. And we acknowledge that, right? And one of the questions we've been saying back to employers is, okay, so among the resumes that you receive, if you're not getting resumes from folks with a lot of prior work experience, how do you pick out on paper who has those soft skills, right? Before you even call them in, how do you begin to tell? And what we have been learning is employers saying, oh, well, if they successfully completed a BOCES program on agriculture, right, then they had to show up on time, right? They have to have some sort of those soft skills sets that I'm looking for. So I think it's sort of incumbent on us as educators and leaders in this space to point that out, right? Be very explicit when we're teaching these young students that, like, hey, your BOCES program, even though it feels like school to you, or your career and technical education program that you went for culinary arts, that was workforce development. Like that is teaching you some skill sets, and you should tout that, and you should explore that not only on your resume, but when you're interviewing, right? Talk about some of those problem solving skills, having to work with peers, having to show up on time, being reliable. That is really key. And I think we need to work with youth more to sort of raise their confidence that they are engaging in workforce development, even if they're thinking, I just went to school. You didn't just go to school.
Thanks, Antonia. I want to focus in more on something Ron mentioned earlier with the multi-generational workforce. So how can employers effectively support and retain this multi-generational workforce with diverse expectations, experiences, and work styles? Ron, do you want to kick us off?
So I think it starts with acknowledgement. It starts fundamentally with empathy and understanding, not painting in broad brushes what different generations might be like, but to understand there are tendencies or typical reactions that people have, but also then, getting to learn the individual and getting to learn what it is. For example, you may have someone that's been a chef in your organization for 30 years and he's getting ready to retire. They're in a different position. They have different expectation of what work looks like than someone who's early in their career. How do you leverage that? How do you put that in a position, say, for example, where they can share their expertise, share their stories, share their history and their experience, pass that on, and put it in the context of how younger generations might resonate with it. A lot of times we take, especially our older individuals, for example, and we just kind of put them on a glide path. Just put them in a position where it's just kind of let them work themselves out, let them have that influence. That's fundamentally one of the things that especially the baby boomer generation, they're looking for that legacy. Likewise, if you flip it around, what is it that those earlier generations are looking for? I think it's been mentioned many times before, but a purpose. What does this connect to? What are we really providing? What is the why that we do of this? I'm from a generation where I never asked the why, right? I just knew it was a job. And you know, in my generation, we found our own job satisfaction. And it typically was something like, just keep doing it for 5 years and you'll learn to love it. Today, somebody can do something for 2 days, and if they don't feel like it's a match, they're out, right? Today, it's our responsibility as leaders and owners and you know, whatever we're doing in that role, to help them find that connection, to help them find that why. And that's going to foster that forward. But a lot of times they're going to have some of the fundamental skills and training, but what they're going to lack is that understanding of, okay, does it really make sense? Does it really matter the way I'm applying this? And if we can help them make, now there's the overlap, right? A lot of times you can use your more experienced individuals to help foster that environment and to nurture and coach those individuals into those positions, but don't expect that they're going to do it the same way you did, because it's a different environment today. So I think not so much a skills focus, but more of an environment focus of what you can create it will really foster some great results.
Thanks, Ron. Antonia, do you have anything for this one?
Yes, one of the things that comes to mind is the culture, right, that you cultivate in your workplace being so important, and that there's a difference when you are promoting people, especially from within, from your sort of your line worker and up to middle management and up to, you know, higher management levels. I think it's important that as an employer, you're supporting their growth as managers too. I'm sure all of us has an experience where they maybe worked with someone who had that technical know-how, like they knew how to do the stuff, but they weren't a people person. They weren't good at cultivating people and relationships. And I think, just following up what Ron just said about purpose, a sense of belonging, that is so powerful. And you need the right managers who are there to coach the people and be there to support the development of their people, and not necessarily get back into doing the technical know-how all the time, right? And from what I have learned from great speakers like this and others, is managerial skills, learning how to manage people. It's usually not intuitive. Like, you have to work pretty hard at it and be mentored and fail and try again and fail and try again. And I think a lot of employers and any organization, probably across industries, right? You think, well, you know, Antonia did such a great job doing this computer work. She can manage a team of 30 people, but maybe I can't. Right? Or maybe I need help to learn how to coach and manage and support people. And my computer know-how becomes less critical as you promote people up that ladder.
Thanks. Chris, do you have anything to add from your education perspective?
Yeah, I think, so the question was, how do you retain your staff, right? So in my experiences, the best way to retain your staff was, number one, to identify what they're looking for. Besides a paycheck, right? Are they looking for skills? Are they looking for camaraderie? Whatever they're looking for. And then you as a boss and you as a management team, take a personal interest in that. Know what John wants, know what Susie wants, know what Tom wants, right? And then in addition to that, have a program that shows success. So what we did was, our hiring process was the same. The people would come and they would stage at our restaurant, and then they would go from there to the beginning stations. And so when I was interviewing people and they were going through the stage process, I would say, see, there's Tom. He's been with us for 5 years. Guess where Tom was 5 years ago? He was sitting right where Ron's sitting. And this is what he did to become successful. And there's a sous chef over there named George, and George has been with us for 9 years. And he came here for 1 year, but this is what he's learned in those last 9 years. And this is what he feels is important to him. But if I didn't take that step to find out what these individuals want and give them that personal touch when we hired them and throughout their career, then that system wouldn't have worked.
And do you have any additional insights in this one?
I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more with what the panelists said. At the end of the day, it's meeting people where they are. And I have a managerial philosophy that you don't manage people, is that you develop relationships with people and you manage to work through those relationships. Great example at Rethink Food, I have a 65-year-old driver. What motivates him is uniquely different than my 26-year-old sous chef in our kitchen, Isabella. And it's just making sure that you can figure out within the realm of reasonability what works for that. With Isabella, she's very much of the new generation where she wants her work to be passionate, but also to be displayed and shared with her friends. And so when we were looking for a new social media marketing person, I didn't go the traditional route. I hired somebody from production. And now if you go to our Instagram, you see that we're showcasing our work, and it's very elevated, high level production in which Isabella is centered in. I didn't have to give her a raise. I just featured her in all these videos, and she's loving that and blooming into her leadership and managerial ability. With Mike, Mike is pushing towards retirement. He, wants to get his routes done as fast as possible, which is efficient for our operation, and it gets him home faster. And so those two motivating factors are uniquely different, but they're all within reason. And it's just getting to know and understand who they are as an individual, and within reason, being able to facilitate those driving factors within the operation.
Great, thanks.
To cap that off, I'll just say there's a saying, if you will, that we use a lot in leadership, and it really helps to focus this. Everybody's familiar with the golden rule, right? Treat others as you would want yourself to be treated. What we talk about is the platinum rule, which is to treat others the way they want to be treated. The way you want to be treated is irrelevant. How they want to be treated, what they want to be appreciated for, what motivates them. You can only get to that through curiosity. You can only get through that through empathy and understanding of that other person. And so we have to, we're always tending to lean in the direction that says, well, this is what I want, so that must be what everybody wants. And we have to dispel that kind of tendency in ourselves and really focus on the other. And that's going to help us to really help them find the path that we want them to find.
Great. Thanks, Ron. For my next question, I want to focus in on Chris and Ken, your direct experience in the culinary workforce. So as technology, markets, and sustainability expectations continually evolve, what do you see as the seafood and culinary workforce's future needs in order to succeed? Okay.
Well, Ken, you're a much better speaker than me, so you can tackle this one.
I think hyper focus on that technology piece. I think that we have to acknowledge, as chefs, culinarians, creature of the industry, we've been very technologically adverse, but it is becoming just the paramount necessity in every industry and every facet of business in life. And it's something that we're existing in attention of right now at Rethink. When we first started out 8 years ago, we we're just picking up food donations, bringing them back to the kitchen, making meals, delivering those. Now there's a heavy level of burdensome compliance that we're aided with by automation, AI, and technology. We have this all-encompassing app that does every facet of our programmatic work, and getting some of my team members to buy in and just utilize that stuff is more than a notion, but it's a necessity for us as an operation to sustain us, because what it's doing is offsetting a lot of those overhead costs that allow us to dedicate the fullness of our resources to wages and the actual impact of the work that we're doing. And so we can't rest on our laurels and just say, oh, we've done this for years, and the nostalgia of what we once were can just exist in perpetuity. No, it can't, because then you won't be sustained. Just being very honest and but also meeting people where you are with technologies. For a lot of my older team members, whether it's on the truck and logistics side or even culinary operations side, technology isn't their forte. And so when we're deploying new technology, or when we're having, software updates to our app that require a little bit more invasive touch points, we develop a training program that can meet them where they are and sit down and guide and walk them through them. We don't just say, oh, here's download the new app and just go up about it. We recognize there's a technical dissidence between some individuals and others, and for the overall efficiency of our operation, we need to make sure everyone's operating on the same plane. So it's just meeting where they are, but just being honest with the fact that you can't just ignore it and think it's going to go away. It's creeping closer and closer to every single thing that we do. Not necessarily the actual making of the meal, delivering the meals, but just ensuring that we have an efficient operation, but also the transparency of the operation, where a lot of risk is involved. We just have to do it.
I would add to that, with the technology part, you know, you need to keep an open mind, right? And if you build an atmosphere of change is okay, change can be helpful, change can be bad, but change is something that we need to do. If you create that kind of culture and you're enthusiastic about it, right? If you're the guys like, hey, we got, you know, this new operating system and we're going to give it a shot and this is what it's going to do bad. But of course, it's going to do a lot of things that are good. And you bring that enthusiasm to the new system. I think that's what really makes the system succeed, because there's no fix all, right? You're going to have 100 problems and maybe it's going to fix 90 problems, but it's going to make 20 new problems, right? And if everyone buys into that and everyone understands that and meets those challenges head on, then I think that's when you have success in your operation, right? And that all comes down from leadership, right? If your leadership is enthusiastic about change and creating change for the better, right? And acknowledging that in every aspect of the guest experience, right? Or the worker's experience, that's what's important.
Great. Antonio or Ron, anything you'd like to add on that one? All right, so we'll jump to our last question before we open it up to the audience. And this one's really focusing in on that waste reduction. So how can industry integrate sustainability and waste reduction practices from harvest to kitchen into training and daily operations to reduce waste and improve profitability? So Ken, you want to start us off since that's really your area of expertise?
I mean, yeah, I think when we first look at sustainability, we should look at sustainability not just in, you know, that climate crisis or how we sustain the ecosystem, but look at it at an economical standpoint. At the end of the day, what we're talking about in local development is preparing a workforce to operate in business. At the heart of it, it's dollars and cents. Sustainability practices need to be embedded in every single aspect of the operation because it's how you are sustaining economically your operation. You want to ensure that individuals understand that when I'm not, you know, getting the maximal yield of that salmon, and I'm just leaving, you know, 1/8 of an inch of edible yield on that skin, that adds up when you're making thousands of meals a week. Try to create a correlation to dollars and cents. It's the biggest thing that we do at Rethink is and how we equate it to, it's not just dollars and cents, but it's, if we don't do this or we waste this much, that's X amount of meals that aren't going out to the door and helping our communities in need. Getting people grounded in what you really mean by sustainability. So at Rethink, we look at that in a holistic lens. It's not just the environmental factors, but it's the economical factors. It's the communal factors. How are we ensuring that sustainability exists in a way, and it's not this buzzword. We know it, where most of us have this sustainability muscle built within us. It's what a lot of our cultures and communities have been doing for centuries, just making do with what you have. It's also giving the individual the autonomy to find those blind sides where at our managerial levels or executive levels, we may not see in the day-to-day operations. They may see that and can offer sustainable solutions that can help make the overall operation more sustainable. So when you put it in economic sense and empower the team members to operate with a sense of latitude within sustainability, it kind of creates a culture within the operational culture of what you're doing.
Thanks, Ken. Chris, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
Sure. I'll dive in a little deeper than what Ron was saying. We had like 60 cooks, right? In one exercise when this came about back in like 2010, we said, okay, 60 cooks, let's all get into the dining room and let's ask a few questions. How many people who here knows what salmon costs? Here who knows what a shallot costs, right? And we just put that out to our cooks. And we were very surprised that very few of them knew what they cost other than the buyers. So then we started to practice, you know, that information. This is what a shallot costs. This is how much a salmon costs. And then we broke our team into different areas and we said, okay, sous chef number one, you're in charge of the cold food today. Let's take all of your waste, right? And there's no garbage can, it's a sheet pan. And then let's have a discussion after the production, where can we put this other than the garbage can, right? And so we did that for about a month, and that helped our waste, that helped our buying. We also, in New York City, you can get deliveries every day. So that's creating a footprint. So then we said to our purchasers, hey, let's get a delivery Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Let's cut it down to 3. And then we went from there to 2. And then we went from there to 1 for our non-perishables. And that was a way for us, in our little sense, to reduce our footprint. And those are some of the techniques we use.
Great, thanks, Chris. Ron or Antonia, anything on this topic?
No, I think just, as Ken said, invite everyone in. Invite everyone into the conversation, into the discussion, into the possibilities. Don't just make it one person's problem or focus that they kind of convey as an organizational objective, but make sure, as you're talking about, that you give them opportunities to really understand the scope of what it is that you're trying to accomplish and to be a part of that accomplishment. If they're a part of the discussion on how to achieve it, then they'll feel that satisfaction of having achieved it when it's realized, and that will really build that momentum.
All right, thanks. So I want to open it up and see if there's any questions in the audience on our workforce development topic.
Can I ask 2 questions, if that's cool? All right, so awesome. So maybe I'm not looking for an answer, but it's kind of more so kind of perspective. So the first question I'm gonna just say is, so I've been on, I guess not procurement, but like on, in a sense, farming, right? When it comes to, I guess the food system, right? So a lot of the difficulty that I had in terms of staff retention was keeping motivation to my staff that were doing really, really hard work when I didn't have necessarily the monetary incentive in order to fulfill that. But the staff that I had were really great, and they were valuable, and they were beyond motivated because it was a really good team. However, I lost a lot of really good skill sets when they had to move on to other locations. So I guess the first perspective is, have you had to deal with something like that? How do you keep motivation up when you're not necessarily able to give a monetary incentive to kind of keep every course and keep that motivation going? That's question number 1.
So I've got the microphone, so I'll go. Compensation it's variable, right? Obviously there's monetary compensation, but there's other ways that you can compensate. For example, in situations, especially kind of mission-based, value-based kind of situations, service-based, continually reiterating that mission, continually giving that sense of what achievement looks like, what good looks like, what accomplishment looks like, and then celebrating the successes of achieving that, right? So we talk about catching people doing things right. Tell them what good looks like, what right looks like, and then catch them doing that. So oftentimes, especially as leaders or managers, we're always looking for what's going wrong and how do we correct it. And we overlook the things that are going right. That really can pay more than money sometimes. I think the other thing is giving people a sense of purpose and a sense of that connection, that they are a part of something bigger, right? It's related to that idea of what the mission is, but then, especially if you're a founder or an owner, it's so important to be able to tell those stories of success. Here was something, in Ken's case, here is what we walked in on, what the situation was, and the joy that we brought to this family by providing these meals, right? I mean, those are the types of things that, sometimes people are going to run for money, but if you can build that environment of appreciation, I think it really is sustainable.
I would agree with Ron. I worked at a place for maybe 20 years, and not once did the person that in charge of me that hired me said thank you, right? And I made it a point to, when I was the boss, to say hello, right? And thank you every day, right? To reach them at their humanity, see how they're doing, know where they're coming from. If they have a long commute, if they live with their parents, or they're a single mom, know those personal aspects, and that will help you retain your staff.
Had a different answer, but Chef here just inspired me to go a different vein down here. And I think that I can fundamentally agree with you more. I think that, for where we operate at Rethink, my budget's set in stone beginning of the year. I don't have very little wiggle room to move around with that. And money is a big motivating factor, but it's how do you motivate people outside of that? And a lot of it is just cultivating a culture where in a place where people want to be. It's doing those intangibles, speaking to everyone, making the work feel fun, making them have some autonomy of the environment. So in the kitchen, like Ken didn't just set the music, but people can change the music to whatever they want. They can put their playlists on there. I can offer up, experiential opportunities to go out and maybe if you get all your production done early, you can have a half day and go to one of our sites and volunteer. Finding those intangibles. But what we do at Rethink is when we're first hiring, interviewing, when I'm interviewing someone, I want to know, I ask that question, what motivates you? So I can start building that relational discourse and understanding so I can lean into that when I know that I can't give everybody a raise. I can't, give you time off per se, but I can start thinking about how I can build those internal motivational factors into the course of your trajectory and tenure with us at Rethink.
I don't have anything else to add other than as managers, it's not just okay to do everything that my co-panelists shared, but I feel like that's what you must do as a manager. That's what you must be spending most of your time doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. And the second question I had is, so I'm the seafood coordinator for the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, and a big barrier to workforce development, right, is also the seafood industry, the very narrow margins that the industry has to, kind of meet, and they're not really making that much profit already to begin with. There are certain skill sets within both the aquaculture and commercial fishing industry that are very, very niche, and filleting fish, right, is another one. A big barrier to a lot of and the only reason I know this also too is I was at an aquaculture conference and this conversation also came up. But a big barrier is the formalized institutional route could be a monetary barrier, especially for these, for these industries. Have you guys done, and maybe it was said before, and I apologize if I'm making you repeat yourself for anything, but have there been any play with maybe some informal workforce development training, like something that might not have such a big monetary barrier, such as like a university or something like that, something that could be, a little bit cheaper. Obviously, teachers get, compensated and stuff like that, but also allowing, the fingers to kind of stretch to different communities and different people that might not have had, that venture before. Love to hear you guys' perspective on it. Thank you.
Anybody?
So that's it, like formal workforce development versus informal workforce development, right? How do you meet people where they're at? One thing that I learned in talking with higher education, workforce development providers, and then industry in New York State is I came into it thinking they talk to each other all the time, right? They must. No, no, they don't. They don't. And it's funny because higher education's like, well, industry needs to tell me what they need and what they're looking for. And industry is saying, why isn't higher education training and providing the skill sets that I need? So I think I think that's a relationship that has to be facilitated and cultivated. And it's very much like people and individual based. So maybe as your contact leaves, you then have to restart that relationship. But Josh, one of the things that we've been working toward in, smaller settings is either like employer-led training or employer-validated training, even if it's like a short 1 week, 2 week course. If a higher education institution is developing that course, really connecting them with an employer in that industry to say, is this meeting your needs? Or if a graduate from this program successfully completes the program, would you interview them? Understanding and sort of making that employer industry workforce development match at the beginning, at the development phase, pays off farther down the road.
So I don't know your specific situation, but I will tell you that there are a lot of industries and companies that I've worked with where what they overlook is the opportunity to have that mentoring and coaching environment internally, to have that person that's been doing it for 30 years put in a position where now their job is to teach the people that are coming behind them. Oftentimes in organizations, I see somebody and it's like, well, what are you doing with Bill with 30 years of experience? Well, we're just waiting for him to retire. His aspiration is to retire, you know, but he's got all this knowledge. Have you ever talked to him about, does he want to train people? Well, no, we haven't. Well, there's an opportunity, right? And so what you're doing then is you're embracing, you're endearing that individual to your organization, you're retaining them for a longer time, potentially to be benefit, but it's a different benefit than they've typically brought before. But what it is, a lot of the learning, especially from younger generations, they appreciate that personalized connection type learning versus the very sterile, huge lecture room kind of learning, right? And so that's the other side of that opportunity.
Ken?
I think that where, from the culinary industry, where we're advantaged in this situation is that the majority of our workforce development is informal. When you go and stage at a restaurant, that's informal workforce development. And frankly, when I look at it, informal versus formal, the only difference is that formal provides a funding opportunity for me. And so that informal, to Ron's point, it gives that opportunity for that individual to have more of a one-on-one or maybe two-on-one type of dynamic in which you can really suss out the vulnerability. Someone can feel more comfortable to ask the questions that if you're in a lecture hall like this and you're showing up every Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 to 12 p.m. and you know, it's just programmatic. It seems like, oh, I'm just in class, I'm just getting through the curriculum, but I really didn't ask the sensitive questions that I need to know about how to be successful in this space, or I didn't get the hands-on exposure to really put myself in that individual's shoes because I wasn't really painted the full picture. It was more so a broad stroke to meet the masses, where you have that individualized audience. You can really dive deep into the specifics of what people are walking into.
Anything to add, Chris? Oh, we have another question here.
Thank you, Michael. Baby Boomer here, Glenn Lee with the Walkman. Thank you very much for coming on out and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. Back in the day, well, one more thing, Ken, right? We got to get together and talk, all right? Ron, I can relate to you because I was from the aerospace industry. And when we were working, we didn't have to go through what we had to go through. And right now we're begging kids to work. We didn't have to do that. You know, we had mentoring, we had apprenticeships programs, and I'm going through the same problem with, you know, retaining people. How, you know, trying to get into the heads of these young people by trying to inspire them to getting into the desires to, do we have to do brain surgery or something like that? Because this is a tough nut, because across the board in this country, we're having a big problem in hiring people and keeping them and getting them off the phone, you know?
Yeah. So, and again, it is the contrast, right? So there was an interesting, as I said, I've been teaching this since about 2007 is when I first got involved. And about 2013, those of us kind of in the community that were teaching and lecturing about generations in the workplace, we all kind of collectively said 2020 is going to be the year that everything gets wacky. Because in 2020, that's the year that the US workforce transitions from predominantly baby boomer and Gen X to predominantly millennial and Gen Z. And so you're going to go from a transition of people that were very high work ethic and accomplishment and that type of perspective to generations that were more work-life balanced and more work-life integration, and that work isn't the only thing in their lives that's important. And so you're going to have this shift in priorities or perspectives. And then what happened in 2020? Boom, a shutdown, right? And all of a sudden, overnight, we went to, you're the most important thing. Your health is the most important thing. You know, I'm from a generation that, you know, if literally I wasn't on life support, I was going to work, right? And how many people remember going to work and coughing and, right? Because that's what you did. Today, you walk in and you cough once, and now there's this hypersensitivity to like, what are you doing here? You're going to make everybody sick, right? So there's a lot of that. The other thing about, especially the younger generation, don't have time to go into a lot of the statistics, but they are significantly different. They are different than we were. And one really predominant statistic is that there's several very credible psychological studies that say that the anxiety-inducing influences, the psychological influences on our typical Gen Zs today are equivalent to what somebody in the 50s would have been institutionalized with. So the influences that somebody in the 50s that would have put them in an institution, today it's just another Wednesday, right? And there's lots of influences, social media and you know, the network, ubiquitous network and all these other things, but they are different. And so we have to have a more nurturing, a more caring, a more connecting kind of philosophy in general than we used to have in former times. And that's across all industries. I still have connections back to aerospace and defense, and they're struggling in the same way that a lot of other service industries and manufacturing, construction, et cetera. So yes, we do have to treat them differently, and we have to acknowledge that they are, you know, physically, we're still the same humanity. We haven't physically transitioned our human nature, but certainly the influences are different.
I'll just add a little note to this. I'm a father of 4 boys, and 2 are graduated college, 2 are still in college. 20 through 29 are my ages, and I'll bang my head against the wall trying to communicate with my younger son. And my wife just said, you know, talk about something that he wants to talk about, right? That's how the conversation starts. And if I think us as in the older generation, if we take that approach, we'll be successful. Because I've had a lot of like 3-word answers, and then I've had a lot of great conversations. And it always started with, what do you want to talk about with Alex? You know, that's as a father, that's what I've been successful with.
As someone who sits between both of the older generation and not quite the younger generation, I see it from both perspectives. As I started my career, I was nurtured, trained, managed by individuals in the older generation, and I adopted in the early sense of my career that same level of work ethic, showing up, dedication, mentality. But as someone now who's leading a number of individuals who are of this younger generation, their motivation factors are uniquely different. Money is not the everything. And also there's just an easeability of just any industry or any job in which they can see because of these phones and social media. If you look at our industry, the growing trend of like, you know, food influencers and social media chefs. That wasn't a thing when I was coming up. And so people don't, I think the younger generation is trapped in having the excess and they can see where they want to go, but that underpinning of maturation and training can't be reinforced on a screen. That's only through individual human efforts, and we're just existing in that tension, and we just haven't found as a holistic workforce that equilibrium yet. And unfortunately, I think there's an urgent pressing need that I'm sure Ron can attest to, because that knowledge share is going to expire with our aging generations. And so how do we capture that in a way that can be salient for younger generations, but also respecting the fact that someone of that older generation who has that knowledge share of information is not going to get on a TikTok or an Instagram reel and try to give it to you. So it's like, how do we find these mediums to bifurcate the dissidence between the individuals who are passing the baton off to, while making sure we don't lose that knowledge share that's cemented many of our industries for years.
I think the multi-generational workplace challenges, this is my second time hearing Ron speak about this topic, and it's fascinating. One of the things we hear from like high school, college age youth, I'm curious if this resonates with Ron, is how much they value peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer mentorship. And it really hit me home when having a conversation with a group of teenagers. And I said, well, you know, where do you learn about nutrition? Like which foods to eat, right? Your doctor? No. Your parents? No. Your family? No. Where do you learn it? Like my friends, the people on TikTok that are my age. That's where I learn it from, right? And it's like that's where they're learning from. And in terms of bringing it back to workforce development and attracting people to your workplace, I feel like if you have a superstar youth oh my gosh, use that to your advantage. Get them out there to recruit additional entrants to your workplace, because that peer-to-peer learning is so critical. And it just goes back to having differentiated managerial styles depending on the generations that you're managing.
Great. Well, thank you,
We got time.
Antonia. So we're coming toward the end of our workforce development panel, but I encourage everyone to continue these conversations as we transition into the networking session in just a bit. But I want to first thank Antonia, Ken, Chris, and Ron for joining us today. Thank you, everybody. And we're going to start. I'll move these chairs, but Chef Bruce is going to take over, and he's going to do a culinary demonstration on
Soup de poisson. Soup de poisson. I'm good. I'm good. I'm
I'll
good.
make you nervous. One of the
Yeah,
two.
you'll make
One
me
of the
nervous.
two. You know.
Hi, everybody. So when we were thinking about what to prepare for the networking session as well as the demonstration, Kristen and I always talk about utilization of underutilized and invasive species and bycatch. And we tried to work to get, what I really wanted to have here to work with would be sea robins, which is usually thrown back by any angler. Bluefish, which is a very oily fish, but a very plentiful fish that's local to our Long Island Sound and Atlantic Ocean, as well as maybe some porgies, or what's we sometimes refer to as scup. And I also wanted some common mackerel, all which are pretty fishy, oily fish, but also fairly inexpensive and not a big market for. We didn't get all that. And one of the reasons why we didn't get all that is because it's complicated. For example, there's not a market for some of these products. And because of fishing boats from other states, right, or fishing boats going to other states without scup, the season ended kind of early, right? Is that correct, right? So they weren't able to fish porgies either. So this is just to illustrate some of the challenges of our local seafood industry, as well as some of the challenges that the fishermen have when they are trying to get their product to shore or get the best bang for their buck. So when we thought about showcasing all those fish, what came to mind was a classic dish that I made many years ago called French soup de poisson. So it literally means fish soup. And the origin of it is down in the south of France in Marseille, where we find bouillabaisse. And both bouillabaisse and soup de poisson have fairly similar flavor profiles. They usually have similar aromatics and saffron and a lot of the same products. However, a bouillabaisse usually has large pieces of fish and maybe shellfish in there. And the soup de poisson is just basically what Chris described, was a tomato soup with a lot of fishy flavor in there, right? So in a sense, that's what it's like. So what I did get through our purveyor are a couple of fish that I'll show you. This is dogfish, or what does it look like to you? A small shark, right? Well, it is. It's dog shark or dogfish. These fish are very, very plentiful throughout Massachusetts Bay and Long Island Sound and North Atlantic. Very plentiful. Not a market for it, though, even though it's the original fish and chips that England is famous for. Has beautiful translucent flesh. It's cartilaginous. Well, actually, that feels bony. It might be a bony type of shark, but it's really tasty. The thing is, if you overcook it, it gets really dried out and tough. So, you know, some people probably shy away from it just for that reason. But if you care about what you're doing, you surely can make this delicious, 100%. I wanted common mackerel, but what I got was Spanish mackerel. Spanish mackerel is actually very tasty. This is one of the types of mackerel that you may find in a sushi restaurant with a light pickling, right? Set on top of, just like made into nigiri. And then we got actually what is now more or less a premium fish, but it's a black sea bass. Now, Chris and I both worked at Le Bernardin. I longer ago than him, and for a much shorter time. But before Le Bernardin came on the map in 1986, black sea bass was not a prize fish, and it wasn't really a fish that people got big money for. Now it is. But I could tell you from personal experience, because I go to Block Island several times a year and I fish, and I catch a lot of these and a lot of porgies, scup. And actually, I think porgies taste better, to be honest with you. I mean, this fish is nice and delicate, but the flavor of porgies is great. And I catch sometimes sea robins and bluefish, and I use them all. I've sauteed up sea robin fillets, and they're delicious. The thing is, every fish is actually delicious. You just have to know how to handle it. But a real easy way of handling it is this following method. And it's going to be fishy in terms of, the overall taste at the end. But it's very easy to make, and it follows a fundamental soup making technique, really. It's basically your typical puree soup making technique. And that technique simply is you sweat aromatics, you add the main ingredient, you add liquid, you cook till all is tender, you puree, and you finish. That's it. And that works for, obviously there's all kinds of nuances within that, but that works for any really type of puree soup. Could be a lentil soup, could be a cream of broccoli soup, it could be this fish soup. It works for everything. Sweat the aromatics, add the main ingredient, add the liquid, right? Cook out, puree, and finish. Easy. Ron, you could do that, man, right? Okay. I have faith in you. By the way, I agree in so much of your approach. That approach that you talked about, management approach, is what I tried to do here when I was dean. Empathy, right? Attitude over aptitude. I gotcha. Anyway, what I'm going to do is cut some of this fish up. Not a lot of it, because it's a lot. But if you notice, this is headed and gutted. But I'm just cutting a couple pieces right through the fins, through the center bone, just like that. Same thing with the black sea bass, right? I'm just gonna take 2 of those pieces. Oh, I never brought that out. Okay, that's okay. And the same thing with the Spanish mackerel. I am gonna discard this piece. Okay, so I have that all ready. These are what's representing my main ingredient. Right here, which is fish or poisson. Now, I have a little pan here, a little saucepan. I'm making a small amount. I'm gonna get that hot. I'm gonna start with a little bit of olive oil. Olive oil would make sense, right? South of France. Butter wouldn't make as much sense, but olive oil definitely makes sense. So go a little bit generous with the olive oil. And then what I'm going to do, I have here these are what I call my aromatics. This is a white mirepoix, right? So mirepoix in French is basically usually a mixture of vegetables that give secondary flavors to some type of preparation. And the most common one is 50% onions, 25% carrots, 25% celery, right? But a lot of times you want to switch that up. It all depends on the present preparation. For this, I like leeks, fennel, and celery. So I'm going to add some of that. Have leeks. Fennel is very important in this dish, so that anise flavor is really important. And I'm also going to add some garlic, and it could be sliced garlic. It's just everything's sliced up here because it'll just cook a little bit quicker, but it's all eventually going to get pureed. So we start sweating that, and a nice thing to do if you're sweating vegetables and sweating as opposed to sautéing is you're cooking these vegetables, you kind of like cooking them translucent and trying to draw out and let them stew in their own juices as opposed to giving them some browning. You don't want really color here. If you ended up getting a little, okay, you could deal with it. But if you get it black, it's going to be bitter. It's going to offer bitter notes. But a little bit of salt goes a long way in starting to draw out some of the moisture. And this is on pretty low heat. So I'm going to sweat that for a bit. Another type of aromatic could be some secondary aromatics can be your herbs and spices. In this case, what I'm going to do is I am going to make a sachet of spices. So I have some bay leaves, a little bit of peppercorns, and that's all I'm actually going to put in there because I'm going to throw the thyme. I'm going to put thyme in this, but I'm going to throw that right into the soup because I could just kind of pass that through as well. What we typically do is we take some string and we tie it around. Not doing too well here. I haven't had a drink yet, so I'm a little, a little shaky. Just kidding about that. And I'm gonna take my knife, I'm gonna cut this off a little. And now I have this to put in afterwards and to infuse, and I don't have to fish out that flavor afterwards. So that I don't have to fish that out after. See, I did get a little brown here. These are very powerful stoves here. I'm going to pull it off the fire. And I'm actually going to add some tomato products, some tomato puree. I'm going to cook that a little bit. Then I'm going to add my seafood right on top of that. I'm going to add a little bit of white wine now. So what that will do is deglaze the bottom a little bit and also help to start cooking the fish. So we'll give that just a little bit of a simmer. Let some of that alcohol cook out. And then all I'm going to do here is cover with some water. Add my sachet. And my thyme. I'll just put that all in, as well as a little bit of black pepper. And a very important ingredient is saffron. So a really healthy pinch of saffron. So that's gonna cook and simmer for several minutes to an hour. It's hard to cook and talk at the same time, you know? It isn't the easiest thing. At home, I don't have to talk and cook. I have to cook and listen a lot. So once this has cooked and simmered for about an hour, everything is cooked, and you want to cook this pretty much to death, right? Like, you know, you're not trying to just set the proteins here. You're trying to cook the fish so they're falling apart and even the bones got a little bit softer, right? And then what you do is simply you have a food mill. Now, if you're at home, if you don't have this, what you can do, if you have like a little immersion blender, you could kind of blend it up in the pot and then strain it through like a coarse, not a fine screen, but a coarse screen. Or you could use like a potato rice or things like that, right? And then what you just do is here, we're gonna just pour this in, all bones and all. Oh, thanks. And we're going to just process it.
That's no good, everybody.
Might not all go through because of course we have bones and stuff, but we process it as much as we can. And then you always want to kind of scrape this off the bottom. Ugh. That's good. Thank you. And then you could reheat it. And we're going to finish it. And the way that we finish the soup is simply we adjust with a little salt, pepper. It's actually pretty good. And we finish with a little bit of Pernod. Pernod digestif, licorice, but very botanical. It's a type of pastis, but it builds on those kind of anise notes that are in the soup. So that gets a little bit. Just one thing about Pernod, it's interesting when you mix it with anything, it goes cloudy, right? Except vodka or something. Yep. So we're going to see if we have enough Pernod in there. I think so. You want to taste, Chef, please?
I think you know what you're doing, Chef.
Not really.
You know? I would add to what Chef was saying. So when we made this back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't take the center cuts like Chef did. In a restaurant like that, we had like little portions. So you always had little tail sections up, little head sections up. So the butcher would gather all those pieces of fish that weren't going to be served to the customer. It would be the byproduct, right, of the portion. And that's what this fish is all about, right? It's the bycatch of the portion. And so you created what would we call that, Chef? A no-cost dish?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a cross-utilization dish, you know? So it uses your byproduct and you just what it does, it helps you optimize your profits and prevent waste, not unlike some of the things you're doing, right? Absolutely. Like even salmon, when you clean the salmon, I would scrape all the bones with a spoon and make some kind of mousseline that I build. I could now take a 4-ounce piece of salmon, put 1 ounce of mousseline on it in some way, and now I have a 5-ounce portion, but I have more 4-ounce portions to make 5-ounce portions. You guys follow that? So then this soup gets topped with some Gruyere cheese, believe it or not. I know that, you know, if you're Italian, you're probably saying, no cheese with fish. And then a little bit of parsley or herbs de Provence, if you want. And then it's served typically all the time with crostini or croutons that have a rouille. And a rouille is like an aioli that's a little spicy, has saffron in it, as well as some sieved cooked potatoes to give it a little bit of texture. That's optional. Now, you could serve these on the side, or you could, you know, float one in if you wanted to. Cool? Now, how easy is that, though, right? Don't you think you guys, anybody could do that dish? Thanks. All right. Look at that, 320. 320. I knew I could do that in 20 minutes.
I have one, Chef Bruce, for someone looking to replicate this at home, can they just use a blender?
I don't think I would use a blender per se. I would use, hold on, I just want to shut these off. I wouldn't use a blender. I would use maybe an immersion blender, you know, but only to pulse it, not to, you don't want to really make it totally pureed, but you could pulse it up a little bit and then pass it through a china cap or some type of a strainer, but not too fine of a strainer. And then, you know, you kind of could work it through, if you're holding the strainer, you could work it through with your spatula, that kind of thing. But the best bet is to have a little food mill. And they're not expensive. You could buy a small household one for $15 or whatever. So they're not expensive whatsoever. Other questions? Right over here.
Wondering how much, real question, but I was going to mention there is a company out there called Red's Best that works.
I know
with a
Red's
lot
Best,
right.
yeah.
They have an anchor program which is really using underutilized fish.
They did. I used to get skate cheeks from them all the time.
Right. And I was with them yesterday at a fish show, and they had all their bulk packed products that they do a lot of stuff with schools with. But that's just an interesting.
Yes.
And they're mostly trying to work with underutilized fish.
Yes, that's their shtick, and they're good at that.
Right.
The thing with Red's Best is, as all chefs should be very adaptable. You know, you can't, if you're I mean, it varies from operation to operation. Some operations, I totally get it. But if you're you know, more of a mid-level to upscale single or small restaurant group, you should be adaptable and be able to use products that come your way, whether they're inconsistent in some way. And the thing with Red's Best is that the supply of some of these products could be very spotty. So you can't necessarily count on them. Like I can't put skate cheeks on my menu for an entire season and know I'm gonna get them. But what I could do is do a market fish, right? And then I could swap out all those things. Or train my staff to say, well, you know, we don't have the skate cheeks today, but what we do have is dogfish fillet prepared in that same manner, or if you want, we could simply grill it for you or something like that. So the training goes a long way as well. But, you know, you got to be adaptable. I was the dean over all the restaurants here at one point, and I had one of the chefs that was I was bringing him wild salmon. It was inconsistent in size. And I saw that they started, and this was for the American Bounty, which is a regional supposed to be like American regional. So Alaska, last I know, is part of the US, right? So he said, you know, I just want this fish to be consistent in size. And this, I said, you're a chef, man. You should know how to like work. You train those students. Go train them. The fish is thinner, hotter for less time. I mean, do I have to tell you that? And I was like, you know, I sort of a light bulb went off in his head. I said it more kinda and with empathy, Ron. So I did. But yet, my inside, I was saying, you know, what the hell am I paying your ass for, right? So anyway, thank you. I
Any
think
other
that's it, right?
questions?
We're good? All right,
All right, well, thank you, Chef.
you're welcome.
All right, so now what you've all been waiting for, get your tickets out. Before we transition into our networking resource expo, we'll have our oyster trucking competition. All that's going to take place out in the lobby area. We also have our resources out for folks to peruse. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. We'll be out there wandering with you and tasting. But we have two of our door prizes. Again, there is the insulated Eat New York Seafood Cooler. There is a cloth for neck ear gaiters, if you're familiar with those. And then there is an Eat New York Seafood Squid sweatshirt. And we're happy to exchange for a size that fits you best. Josh is gonna pull our first ticket. All right, and winning number is 448539. Antonia, all right. All right, Josh, pull second. All right, second, 448534. 534. Nobody?
I love that.
448534, last call.
It's terrible when they do.
All right, one more. Was that? Oh, do you have a ticket? No. Okay. All right, 448536. All right, our panelists. What did I do with that? It's in my 36. Oh, all right, Ken, thank you. All right, everybody. So I also say our other panelists, Ron and Chris. This is here we do as a token. We've got a sweatshirt or a buff for you. If your preference, come find me. We'll get that for you. If you have use for another one, Antonia and Ken, for maybe tomorrow, you're welcome to take. But thank everybody. Thank you all for coming. And we'll be mingling, mixing, and exploring out in the lobby. Various preparations of some of New York's locally farmed species. So Hudson Valley steelhead is up there. We have locally grown oysters from Barry, what's the farm name? Sixth Farm? Maristella oysters. We also have a variety of our local seafood species wild capture that Chef Bruce showed today. You'll be able to taste the soup de poisson up there as well as some local skate. Thank you, everybody. And for our online participants, unfortunately, you can't participate in this part, but we thank you for joining us today. And we will be sending out follow-up emails with links to all of the resources we talked about, the slides, the recording for today's session, as well as our post-summit evaluation. Everyone remember, post-summit evaluations, there's the QR code up in the front. Take that at the end, submit your information, and you'll also be entered in to win another buff and shirt.